Hello and welcome back to Concept First to Mastery. In this particular section, I'll be showing you how to work with container queries like a pro. So container query was actually one of the most requested CSS feature, right, by developers. Before it was actually, the request was actually granted in 2022. So since then, it has been noticed that many developers are actually yet to start using these actively in their project. And this is actually has been explained to be due to the perceived technicality involved in its usage. What I mean by that is that it is not as simple as when you use media query, even though it's similar to media query in its usage, right? But yeah, there are some technicalities involved, and there are some concepts that you will need to actually have at the tip of your finger, right, to be able to use it right. So that is why this tutorial section is coming up, just to do justice to that and ensure that we can use container queries and harness the powers that comes with it. Personally, I've been using it and I love it very much. It gives you so much flexibility, right? And it gives you so much control regarding how you lay out elements on the page, right? So you might want to ask, why was it the most requested CSS feature at the time, right? This is because even though we have media query, right, which is great when it comes to making elements on the page responsive, right? But then we are still limited in a way because media query actually references a global state property. So when I say global state property, I'm referring to something like the device viewport. It's a global state property. So developer thought it was that, oh, it will be wonderful and we are going to have more control if we can have elements actually also reference a local state property, right? Something like a container. So an element within a container, if it can reference that container and adjust its layout based on what we have in that, well, based on the width of the container, right, as against the device viewport, right, it's going to give us more power, right, and flexibility, and we are going to have a very dynamic layout, and that is what container query actually gives to us. You can't be left behind. You just have to take time to actually learn it, and it's not actually that difficult, right? So so what I'm just going to do now is I've actually prepared a demo, right, that I will want to use to actually explain this. So let me just show you that. All right, so you notice that I have this design prepared, right? We have these cards, and these cards actually reside within a container, right? So what I want to do here is to actually use container query, or what I did there was actually to use container query to explain how dynamic and flexible, right, things can be when it comes to the usage of container queries. So let me just try to demonstrate this. Currently now we have three. Okay, let me just open the responsive design. So we have three cards, right? And you will notice that at this point, right, the three cards share similar layouts, right? So you can see that I have the first name, last name at the center, then this extra information by the side, then these action buttons, right, the follow and the message, they are actually stacked on top of each other, right, like in the block flow. The same thing for the rest. But what happens the moment I decide to increase the width of this a little, right, just a little. So you can see that these two cards, the three cards are within the same container, right? But these two cards still maintain the same layout. Whereas this third one, right, because it's having more space, is now having a different layout, right? So you can see that this is sitting side by side along the horizontal, right? This is hidden, right, until we get to a particular minimum width where, right, we decide to show this, right? So you can see that this is not showing in these two cards. Then if, the moment I go back to it, so you can see that we maintain the same flow. The moment I increase the width, right, you can see that we have a different flow. This turns green, right? I'm just showing you this. What you can do is up to you, right? But I'm just showing you this to tell you that, yeah, you can actually make your elements, right, respond to their container width as against responding to um, the viewport, which is what the media query offers us. So this is actually within a flexbox, right? And it's actually taking advantage of the flexbox responsive property, which is flex wrap, right? So, but it just happened that when each of these cards can no longer sit conveniently, right, maintaining the minimum width they are supposed to hold, that one of the card will just need to go down, right? And in doing that, it's going to be occupying more space. And the moment you have more space, right, we want to switch the layout, and that is what we are doing here. It's almost impossible to do this with media query, right? Because these cards now are actually going to be within the same viewport, right, when it comes to media query. But because we are actually referencing the container and not the viewport, we are able to switch the layout. So that's what makes container queries actually powerful, right? So let's just dive more into this. Yeah, so in order to actually explain what we have there, so I have actually prepared the HTML ahead. I don't want this to be a long section, right? So I've prepared the HTML ahead. I've just explained what we have. You can see that we have a container div, right? And it's given the class of card container. Then we have three cards in there, card one, card two, card three. So all of them shared common classes, like each card is having the class of card, right? Then each card is divided into three sections: the header section, the content section, right, and then the footer section. The same thing for the rest. That's just the structure that I have here, right? So you are free to also implement this or just practice with an example that works well for you, right? But the moment you get the concept, you'll be able to implement it in different scenarios that the design gives to you. So so what I'm going to do is, before we dive into container query, trying to, because what I'll be doing is I'll be writing the CSS, right? Consider there's nothing here, right? Just to ensure that I'm able to explain the concept of where you use container query and all that. But before we dive into container query, just like I said, there's some technicality involved. There are some concepts that you need to understand. And without this, you will not be able to actually use it effectively, right? Because understanding is power. Understanding is very important. So let's just look at some concepts quickly. So let's start with container queries. So what are container queries? So container queries actually allow elements to adapt based on their parent containing container size. So we are saying not just the viewport like the traditional media query. So what container query does is that they allow elements actually to adapt, right, based on their parent container size, which is where the power is, right? Because without that, um, we'll be referencing the device viewport, right, which does not really give us that flexibility that we desire. So container queries moves us beyond considering only the viewport, right? And it allows any component or element to respond to a defined container width. That is powerful. If you remember how position works, right? We have like 5 different type of position. We have static, we have fixed, right? So fixed actually usually reference the browser window, right? So, but we now have these two that makes positioning powerful, and that is relative and absolute. With relative and absolute, you can position any element, right, referencing a parent container that is having a position of relative. If you are used to position element already, you should kind of get this scenario I'm trying to paint. That is the same thing that is happening with container queries, right? Instead of referencing the viewport, right, we can now reference the container width. So while you may still use a responsive grid for overall page layout, right, a component within that grid can define its own changes in behavior by querying its container. So what I'm saying is that, yes, it's not just media query that we use for responsive design, right? We have other approaches. Your choice of layout system, for instance, the use of grid, the use of flexbox, right? These features have responsive mode in them, right? You can choose to take advantage of that, but we are saying within that too, right? You can still make use of container queries, which is kind of powerful. It just gives you that full-fledged flexibility. So how do we use container queries? To use container query, right, you must first define a container type and optionally a container name, right? So you must have defined a container type. I will show you all that in code, but I'm just trying to tell you that in order to define a container query, right, you must have a container, right, and you must define the container type. So then you can define the container query, and this is just how it looks, right? So as container, and that's why I say that it's commonly say it's similar to media query, because this is exactly the syntax you write for media query. As container, max width of 400 pixel, right? So this is saying everything from 400 pixel to 0, right? That's what max width means. So we are trying to change the font size of the card to 14 pixel, right? So that's just what. But at this time around, we are not referencing the at media. We are not referencing the viewport. We are referencing the container, right? So there is no need to rely on the entire screen to make your layout or your elements adjust, right, to the desired layout. Container type property. So when you are working with container, right, you must set the container type property, just like I mentioned. I'm just trying to narrow down into the different values that the container type property can hold, right? So the container type property can actually hold different types. The size, it can hold, we have the properties, we have the value size, inline size, and normal, right? So of course, the size and number are not commonly used. The one that you will commonly use, the one that you will often use, right, is the inline size. So, but let's just understand at least what they do. So the size, when you set the container type to size, it actually creates a query container for both inline and block dimensions, right, as well as the style. So three things: when you set the value to the container type property to size, the meaning of that, when you set to size, meaning of that is that you have the container query created for both inline block dimensions and as well as the styles, right? I want to believe that you already understand what inline and block elements are, block dimensions are. Every element is either in the inline flow or block flow, right? So inline size. So another value you can set is inline size. So this sets up a query container, right? Specifically for inline dimensions and style. So take note of that. And this is the one that is most commonly used, like 99% of the time that this is the one you'll be using, the one that creates a container query specifically for inline dimensions and styles, right? Then we also have the normal. So this one only establishes a query container for styles. So just take note of that. But most times you'll be using the inline style, right? Container query unit. So these are some of the things that you just need to understand. So I've talked about the fact that you need to set up the container query type, right? Then the different values you can set. Then we're also talking about the container query unit. So container query unit specify a length relative to the dimensions of the container query. Don't forget that we have said that, yes, you are dealing with a container. This container is going to have width, right? So we are trying to set a unit, right, that specifies the length, a unit that specifies a length that is relative to the dimensions of the query container. So what I'm saying with that is this is just similar to when you say viewport, relative to viewport, one viewport, two viewport, which is like 1% of the viewport, 2% of the viewport, just like that, right? So units of container queries. The container query length units are, we have CQW, right, which is 1% of the width of the query container. Then we have CQH, which is 1% of the height of the query container. Then we have CQI, which is 1% of the inline size, right, of the query container. We have CQB, which is 1% of the query container block size. So we have the rest there, right? So, but note, these are actually useful when designing responsive layout inside a container. So when you actually use this unit when you are using container query, right? And you actually want to create response, you want to make your elements responsive enough, right? Referencing the container width and height, right? So this is an example usage of where you actually define, look at this now, we have a card container and we have the card itself. So they, like I told you already, you must specify the container type. And here we are using inline size, right? And we have already said that inline size will create a container query, right? That actually references that makes use of the inline, right, and style, so there is no block to it. So then what you also notice here is that in the card section, we now have the query unit length, the query units being container query units being used, right? So we have ATCQW. So, and this actually means 80% of the container width. So that's what this container query length does, right? They reference the height and length of the container itself. So when you are saying width of 80 CQW, as 80%, the card is actually 80% of the container width. Height 30 CQH, 30% of the container height, right? So which is going to make the card responsive. So if the card width and height is increasing, right, you can expect that this will also increase relative to that. And if it is decreasing, it also decrease relative to that. I think that's just what I want to show you. The same thing, you can see that we're also using that unit for the font size, just to ensure that the font size is also responding based on the container size, right? So media query versus container query. So just something simple here. Why media query excel at viewport based adaptation, right? Which is great. Container queries offer a more contextual aware approach. So it enables elements to respond dynamically to their container dimensions. And this is the power, right? When you have elements on the page, right, responding dynamically to their container dimension, not the viewport, you have more power, right? I've been using this and I love it, right? And you will love it too. So browser support, if you are doubting the browser support, you can see it here. You can also visit the Can I Use site, right, to actually check the current browser support. But this is the latest that I have from there, right? I just screenshot it. And you can see that Chrome is having great support, version 106 to 132 and all this, right? So Edge, Safari, all these modern browsers, right? They have support for container queries already. You can see known issues 0. Yeah, that's it. When to use container queries. When designing reusable component, when you are designing a reusable component that should be flexible enough, right? You might want to think about the use of container queries, right? Because at this point, you will not be referencing the viewport. You will just be referencing the container width, right? So when elements appear in different layouts, just like the example, the demo I created, right? It's about elements appearing in different layouts, right? So, and need to adapt. When a sidebar, card, or section should resize independently, right? You also take advantage of container query. When building flexible design system for modern UIs, you want to make use of container query. So, and it just gives you that power. You can't do without it. So container queries is actually equal to more flexible component-driven design. So this is not viewport-driven design, right? This is component-driven design, which is actually very powerful. So if you want to know more about this, right, you can make use of this. You can make use of these resources. I find them to be very, very useful. So let's go into the actual demo, right, and see how we can make the current HTML page, right, that I have, make use of container query. So just like I've already explained the structure that we have here. So let's just start styling, right? I will start with the card container, then the actual card. and we'll see. I will also be taking advantage of CSS native nesting. So if you don't know about that, my last section was on that actually. So if you don't know about that, we can now write nested CSS, right, without actually having to use any preprocessor like SAS and less, right? So here we have this universal selector, and I just want to do some basic reset here with setting the margin to 0 and padding. Let's set the padding also to 0, right? Then let's set the box sizing to border box. Again, just before I continue, if you like the contents that I've been sharing, right, please endeavor to subscribe to the channel, right? It helps the channel actually grow. Also, don't forget to like the content. Thank you. So the body part, right? The body of the element. Let's set the background color to let's set the background to ash 333. So this dark color, right? So that's just something basic. Then let's start with the card container, right? I told you we have a card container. So that card container, we are going to have the background color, right, set to beige, right? Then let's also have the max width. This is so that 1024 pixel. This is so that the container is actually limited, right? So you can see that if I expand this, you can see that this is just taking that max width. It's not going to grow beyond this, right? And that also makes it responsive. I'm using max width, which is responsive. Then we have margin. So let's say since I'm setting the max width to this, right, it's going to be on one side of the, it's going to be on the left side of the screen. So I want it to be centered. And the way to evenly distribute the remaining width, right, is to actually use margin. Let's use margin 100 pixel top and bottom, right? Then left and right of auto. So that means the space to the size will be automatically distributed by the browser, which will make the page, this card container, to actually center. Then we have padding. Let's have padding of 30 pixel, right? And also let's have okay, so let's set the display, because here I told you already that you can use grid, right? But I use display or flex, right? I'm using flex here. So to control the 3 items or the items within the container. So display of flex. If you don't know how to use flex, you can also check my flex flex CSS flex section, right? Display of flex gap of 15 pixel, right? These are just flex box property, right? Flex wrap. So this is where I'm taking advantage of the responsive feature that Flexbox gives us. So flex wrap of wrap, which means that when the minimum width set for each of the card, right? Each of the card item, I'm going to set a minimum width for them. When the minimum width for each of those cards, when each of those cards can no longer maintain that minimum width sitting on the horizontal line, right, it should actually just move to the next line, so that we can have this automatic layout responsive mode without having need to use media query to do it, right? So then justify content, I'll just say to the center. So let's just see what we have currently. As I'm doing this, I also want you to be seeing, right? All right. So this is what we have currently. You can see that this is the container card, and it's already centered. And we have these 3 items, right, also at the center. Each card needs to be styled now, but we already have that. We already see that we have a structure there, right? So let's move on to the card actually itself. So for the card, so this is where I'll be setting the container type. You know, I told you that when you want to use container query, you must set the container type. So for your own case, you could have set the container type here, right? But for me, I'll be setting the container type on the card itself. So you can declare the container type on the card itself instead of on the container, right? You can make the card itself its own container. So, and that's what I'll be doing here. And you can also do it from here, just like the example I showed you, right? When I was presenting the basics. So here I'll just say container type is set to inline. Don't forget, inline size just means that it's going to create a container query box, right? That makes use of the inline and styles. Then we also have flex. So I'm going to set the flex here. Don't forget flex here because we already the parent container is a flex. It's a flex box, right? This container is a flex box. So that means on the flex item, we can actually define how we want them to respond in terms of whether we want them to grow, shrink, right, and also the minimum width for each of the card, which is the flex basics. So I'm going to use 1, 1, and 300. 300 represents the minimum width I want for the card before it wraps, right? So then I also want padding of 10 pixel, right? Padding of 10 pixel, background color of FFF. So I will still say something about using Tailwind to do this, but it's just that, the way this thing works, if you know how to do it yourself, using Tailwind becomes even much more easier. But if you don't know how to do it, if you can't explain it, if you're using Tailwind, you will still be confused, right? So border radius of 12 pixel. Then let's have box shadow of 0 pixel, 2 pixel vertical, 4 pixel blur, right? An RGBA of 0, 0, 0, 0.1 transparency, right? So yeah, I think that's just what I want there. And don't forget, I told you I'm going to be using CSS native nesting. So you can see what we have now. You can see that card, you can see the shadow on it, right? You can see this card, you can see this card. So all right. So inside here, don't forget that the card itself is having inside this card, we have the header section, we have the content section, and we have the footer. So I'll be using that, right? So here, if I'm using CSS native nesting, right, all I just need to do is ampersand dot header. So ampersand there is referencing the card, right? This is more organized and clean. I prefer this because I can just hover on this and see all the styles that belongs to the card, right? So dot header, then all I need to do here is say height is going to be 100 pixel, right? And then you can also say background color, or background is going to be sky blue, right? Sky blue. Then we can also set the border radius. Can set the border radius to 10 pixel. Then the position. So I spoke about positioning. So you can see that it's very powerful now, because right now, if I don't use position relative on this, what I want to do will not work because it will reference the browser window. I don't want to reference the browser window. I want it to reference this card and stay within this card. So that's why I'm setting on the, or I want to reference this header section and stay within the header section. That's why I'm placing position relative on the header element, right? So that it can actually have that position relative. Then I can now use absolute on other elements within it to reference it, right? So within the head elements, right, I just want to do other styling. So I will do ampersand again, dot image outer. So ampersand here, because ampersand here now is referring to the dot header. So this is saying that image outer class, right, element is actually within the header element. And if you check this also, that is what we have, right? You can see that I have this header box, right? Within it, I have the image outer and I have the image inner, right? So that's just why I'm nesting it that way. So inside here we can have width defined to be 100 pixel, right? We can define the height to be 100 pixel also. So what I'm trying to explain, what I'm trying to do now is this, right? I'm trying to design this, right? This area, and then this image box, right? So that's what I'm trying to design. So we have the outer image set to 100 pixel width and height. Then the border radius, so that we have that curved edge, the border radius of 50%, right? I could have just copied this and paste it and actually explain the container query part size, queries parts, right? But this just allows us to understand the flow and how it works, right? If you want to learn something, you just pay the price of learning it. So background color of ash FFF, right? And then display of flex, right? So I'm using display of flex because I want to have control over the items within this outer image, right? So then I'll just say justify contents to the center. So which means all the items within that should be to the center. Then I also want to say align items to the center. So this will make everything within this outer image to be perfectly centered, right? Then I also want position. So the position there now will be absolute. So since position there is absolute, it's actually going to reference the immediate parent container, which is this header. So it's not going to reference the browser window. And that gives us that power to position anything on the page, right? So this is not done. I need a bottom, right? Bottom of negative 30 pixel so that we shift it out of place, right? Then we want left of, let's say left of 25%. All right. So that's just what I want there. Then if you come here, so can you see that now? So then let's move on to the outer, right? So just say ampersand again, ampersand dot image inner. So within the outer image outer, we also have image inner. So that's why the image inner is nested within the image outer, right? So here we are going to have width of 90 pixel. I'm also going to have height of 90 pixel, right? We're also going to have border radius of 50%, right? So that we can have that circle. Then we have a background color of, let's just say blue. So by the time I apply that, right? So you can see what we have now, right? So if you want this to be perfectly centered, all you just need to do is adjust this, right? To say maybe something like 30, let's see. Yeah, so you can just move it around and even shift it to 35, I think. Yeah. So that's it with that part, right? So let's move on. So don't forget that we've not implemented, this is just basic design. We've not implemented the part, okay, maybe I should also be showing that. We've not implemented the layout using container, right? Query. So you can see that this comes down, and we, even though we have more space and the card is bigger for this, right? But they still maintain the same layout, right? So, but we can now make use of container query to switch the layout for this when we have more space, right? And maintain this layout when we have no space. So that's just the goal here, right? So let's just continue. So I'm done with the head section, the header section of the card, right? So let's see the content section of the card. So what I just do is that you can see that I can easily see all the CSS styles, right? That has to do with the header. Then I can come outside here and now do the same thing for content, right? dot content. For content, we want margin set to 2 rem top and bottom, right? 0 left and right for that. Then we want inside each content, I have heading 2, ampersand heading 2. So ampersand here now is referencing the parent, which is the content, right? Here, I also want to set the color to black, right? Fonts, set the font weight to border, right? And then let's set the text align to center so that it's perfectly centered on the page, right? All right, so that's it for the heading 2. And if you come here, so you can see that things are shaping out and this is perfectly centered on the page. So then we can now continue with the style. I also have heading 3 there, right? So let's also have that style. Color set to gray, right? Then we can set font weight to border, right? And then text align to the center also, right? So once you do that, you can see that things are perfectly centered also. So maybe I should also display the screen instead of switching all the time, right? So that you can be seeing it. Okay, it's just because I also need to be showing you the responsive. Our focus here is the responsive design and not that. So let's just continue with that. Then after the end of 3, I also want to, that should be within. So I also want to style the location box, right? Location box, right? And that is this. So if you see here, after inside the content area, I have heading 2, I have heading 3, I have location box. Inside location box, I have all this, right? Then I also have extra info. Inside extra info, then I have the footer. So just that's why I'm said CSS nesting just allows to organize things. It makes our code more readable. So margin top, set margin top to 10 pixel, right? For that, set margin bottom to 20 pixel, right? And then here we want to take advantage of flex again, display of flex, so that we can control the children item. Display of flex, right? And what we want to switch the flex direction to column, right? And then align items, right, to the to flex start. And that should be the default behavior anyway. Then gap to 20 pixel. All right, so that's what we want on the location box. So inside the location box, so you can see what I have here, right? So inside the location box, we have some other things. That's why we also nest that again, referencing this, right? Ampersand reference this as a parent. We are saying dot job title. So job title. So for job title, we also want to say display of flex. So I like using flex a lot because it allows you to control the children item. So gap of 15 pixel. So the space between each of the flex item. Align items to the center, right? So if you check the page, so you can see that effect, right? So these two guys will be perfectly aligned along the horizontal. So then we also want, apart from the job title, let me also do the same thing for location, right? Job title, then there is location too. Location. So I'm going to make this CSS available, right, in my GitHub repository. Display of flex 15%. So the same thing for dot location, right? And if you want to see that again, this is, you can see we have location here. We have an icon and a name. Then we have job title and icon. So that's what I'm trying to target, right? So that's done with that. Then the other one we want also is the extra info. I think the extra info is still within the, let me see. Okay, the extra info is not inside the location box. So we will not be nesting it here, but we'll be starting it outside here and saying, okay, even though it's not within the location box, it's still within the content, right? We just say dot extra info, right? Dash extra info dash box. So let's see, let me confirm that name to be sure that I'm spelling it correctly. Okay. All right. So inside here, we are going to have, we're just going to say display of none. That's because we are defining rules for the small card. We don't want it to show at first, right? We don't want to consider it's gone. We don't want it to show at first until we bring it in with our container query, right? So I think that's it with that part. Then we can now come to the footer section. So, and we are almost done. So the footer section is not inside the content. Again, you can keep track of all this. So if I do this, you can see the end of content here, right? So now I need to deal with footer. Ampersand dot footer is having the footer class, right? So here I'll just say display of flex again to arrange items within the footer section, display of flex, right? Just give them a gap of 10 pixel, Then let's have flex direction set to column. Yeah, direction set to column. Then within that particular footer section, we have ampersand button, right? We have button elements two actually. So there we are just going to have padding. I'm going to set the padding to 5 pixel, 10 pixel, right? Then we're also going to set the let me try to expand this so that you can see it more. All right, so we're also going to set the background color to sky blue, right? And then we're going to set the border radius so that the buttons are going to have edges, right? Curved edges, 5 pixel. And then lastly, we are going to set the cursor to pointer, right? So that's just it for that section. And you can see that we have this now. So it's as simple as that, right? Then the other part now is to define the middle, because right now, like I explained to you, when this goes down, we still maintain the same layout. But let's say our design is saying that when we have this mushroom, this layout should change. This button should sit side by side, right? The hidden section here, the extra info should be displayed, right? And this should also be change the layout here should not be column but should be horizontal. The background color of this should not be sky blue but green. Those are the changes we want to bring in with the container. Just imagine you want to now do this thing with media query, right? We are not going to be able to do that. Then the same thing with if you want to do it with flexbox or grid, it's not going to work because we're already within flexbox here, right? And within that flexbox or within grid, we still want to change layout. That's why we just need element to respond to the component level. And that's what brings that dynamic design, responsive design that we so much desire, right? So outside, still inside the card, right? But outside footer, we are now going to define our, we call it container query, right? For the container query, we just have as container. That's how you define it, right? As container, then you have this where you have your root, then you have the declaration block where you write the CSS styles. So here we just want to set minimum minimum width to 38 pixel or 38 rem, So what that is saying is that once the minimum width of the container, now when I say add container, right, since I'm not using container name, I don't even want to go into that now, but don't forget the containers can be named too, right? So this one is going to reference this. I set the container width already. I set the container type already to inline size. So it's going to be looking at this card, right? That's what it's going to be referencing as its container. So when the card container is having a minimum width of 38 rem, whatever rule we define here will kick in, right? Below it, we are going to have everything defined within here. So that's it. And here, we want to target the header, right? We are saying the header should dot header actually. So we are saying the header should have a background of green. Right? Then let's also target some other property. Then the at content, dot content, right? We are also targeting that. And we are saying inside that content, we have dot location, right? That's location box, right? We are saying let's change the flex direction to row. It's actually column, right? To start with, let's change it to row. Then we also have inside that content, we are saying we have at dot extra info box, right? We are saying let's change the display to flex. The display is none, right? To start with. But now, once we hit this container minimum width, right? We want to change it to we want to change the display actually to flex. Then we want to set the gap between each item there to 20 pixel, right? So within this particular extra, what's it called? Within this particular extra box, we have dates and posts, right? If you check here, under extra info, we have this dates, we have this post, right? So I just want to take advantage of this, use flexbox to style them and all that. So we can also do that here. And don't forget that this style is kicking in when the container width is at the minimum of 338 rem. So that's like 38 times 16 to convert it to pixel, right? 16 pixel is the default browser font size. Okay, so for that, I'm just going to, that's still inside extra box, right? I'm just going to have ampersand dot date, right? And we're going to have display of flex again, display of flex. Then we're going to have gap of 15 pixel, right? And then we are going to have align items of center, all right? So we have that for dates. I'm just going to copy this and use the same for post dot post. So it's going to be the same style, dot post, right? So that's it. You can see that this is beautiful. I like using native CSS, right? Because it just allows CSS to be really organized. And this is all about card style, right? And then the last one I want to style here is the footer. I want to switch here is the footer. So I can just come outside here and say ampersand dot footer. So for the footer, I want to switch the direction of the flex, right? So flex direction will now be row. So instead of using column that we're using before, then the button, ampersand button. So so the button is going to have flex of 1, just so that they share the remaining space equally, right? The two buttons will share the remaining space equally and just grow to fill in the container. So by the time I come here, so you can see what we have, right? You can see that even though this kept the previous layout, because this card is not up to 38 rem, right? But this one is already more than 38 rem, and that's why the flow, the container styles that we define, right, now kicks in. This is now along the horizontal. This is showing, whereas it's not showing here. This is green. This is not green. These two buttons, action buttons, are now along the horizontal, right? As against what we have here when there is not enough room where we have them stacked along the column, right? So this is just one approach to it, right? whatever scenario you find yourself, if you understand this, right, you'll be able to bring in the same understanding and make your website, your application pages, right, container responsive and not solely just device viewport responsive, right? So that's it with this section actually. So yeah, yeah, see you in the next section. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, right? And like the video. You can also drop your questions, right? I'll take time to respond to that. And if there's any content you would love me to also work on, right? I can also do that for you. Thank you and happy coding.